Nós, estudantes de Relações Internacionais da PUC São Paulo e integrantes do Grupo de Estudo de Conflitos Internacionais, firmamos uma parceria com Democracy Now!
A partir de agora, vincularemos com legendas em português as mais importantes notícias internacionais da semana.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon, we're coming out.
Just days after President Trump vowed to withdraw troops from Syria, tension in the war-torn country has escalated again. Overnight, Israeli fighter jets bombed a Syrian airbase used by Iran. On Saturday, a suspected chemical weapons attack killed at least 60 people in the town of Douma. President Trump is now warning Syria and Russia there will be a big price to pay. We'll speak with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald about Syria, Israel's deadly attacks on Palestinian protesters in Gaza, and the political crisis in Brazil. On Saturday, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva turned himself into police on a controversial corruption conviction that will likely prevent him from running in this year's presidential election.
Eu vou atender o mandato deles.
I am going to attend the mandate so they won't say tomorrow that I am a fugitive and that I am hiding myself. I am going to let them know that I am not afraid and that I am going to prove my innocence.
Today, Glenn Greenwald from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for the hour. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The UN Security Council is meeting today to discuss the crisis in Syria, including a deadly alleged chemical weapons attack over the weekend that killed dozens of people. Early this morning, 2 Israeli F-15 warplanes reportedly bombed a Syrian airbase used by Iranian forces. There are reports 14 died in the strikes, including Iranian nationals. Israel is said to have launched the raid from Lebanon's airspace. The Israeli bombing came after a suspected chemical weapons attack killed at least 60 people in the Syrian town of Douma, the last rebel-held town in eastern Ghouta. The Syrian opposition is blaming the Assad government for carrying out the attack Saturday, but Syria denies having any role. The chemical attack came one day after Syrian forces launched an air and ground assault on Douma. While international officials are still investigating what happened, President Trump took to Twitter to directly accuse Russian President Vladimir Putin of playing a role. He wrote, "President Putin, Russia and Iran are responsible for backing animal Assad." Trump went on to warn there would be a, quote, big price to pay. This all comes as today marks John Bolton's first day as President Trump's national security advisor. We'll have more on the updates in Syria after headlines with Glenn Greenwald. In Gaza, hundreds of mourners gathered Saturday for the funeral of the Palestinian journalist Yasser Mortaja, who was fatally shot by the Israeli army while covering protests along the Israel-Gaza border Friday. Photos show the 30-year-old journalist was wearing a flak jacket, clearly marked press, at the time he was shot dead. He's one of at least 9 Palestinians who were killed by the Israeli army during its brutal crackdown against Friday's protests. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 31 people in total have been killed since Palestinians kicked off a 6-week-long nonviolent protest late last month dubbed the Great March of Return. This is Mortaja's brother, Mutasem, speaking after his brother's killing.
I
was next to him at the protest. Targeting the journalist was very clear, to the point that they targeted the 2 of us directly, using snipers and gas bombs.
Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has drawn outrage for saying there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. On Sunday, Lieberman told Israel's public radio, quote, "There are no innocent people in Gaza Strip. Everyone's connected to Hamas. Everyone gets a salary from Hamas. And all the activists trying to challenge us and breach the border are Hamas military wing activists," he said. Both the International Criminal Court and the United Nations have rebuked Israel in recent days and warned its actions on the border with Gaza could violate international human rights conventions. We'll have more on the protests in Gaza later in the broadcast. In Brazil, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has turned himself into police and has begun serving a 12-year prison sentence for a highly controversial corruption conviction. His surrender came after a 2-day standoff during which he spent the night in Sao Paulo's Steelworkers Union building to avoid his incarceration. Lula's jailing comes after the Supreme Court rejected Lula's bid to stay out of jail while he appealed his conviction, effectively removing him from Brazil's presidential election later this year, where he was the frontrunner. We'll go to Brazil for more on Lula's jailing later in the broadcast. We'll speak with The Intercept's co-founder, Glenn Greenwald. U.S. officials say North Korea has said its leader, Kim Jong-un, will be prepared to discuss denuclearization during a proposed upcoming meeting with President Trump in May. The meeting, if it takes place, will be the first time a sitting U.S. president has met with a North Korean leader. Kim Jong-un is also slated to meet with his South Korean counterpart, President Moon Jae-in, in a face-to-face gathering at the so-called Truce Village in the demilitarized zone on April 27th. In the United States, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, has carried out the biggest workplace raid in a decade, arresting nearly 100 immigrants working in a meat processing plant in rural Tennessee. Thursday's raid against Southeastern Provision came after ICE agents raided 7-Eleven stores nationwide. This is the son of one of the workers arrested in the raid, speaking at a news conference Saturday.
My dad was supposed to come home. When I came home from school, he did everything with me. We played soccer. He helped me with my homework. He did everything. All that I ask is that we're still is to help us and pray for everybody that doesn't have their families, and please unite them back together.
Texas has deployed 250 National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border following President Trump's announcement last week he'll send troops there. Arizona's also announced it'll send 150 National Guard troops. The National Guard soldiers will not have the power to arrest people trying to cross the border without authorization. Yet critics say the presence of the National Guard will free up Border Patrol to do heavier policing and establish more checkpoints and patrols. President Trump had initially called for active-duty military members to be deployed to the border, not National Guard. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt is facing increasing scrutiny after the Associated Press revealed the agency has spent nearly $3 million on Pruitt's security detail alone, including 18 full-time agents. The EPA and President Trump have claimed Pruitt has faced death threats, but an investigative reporter with BuzzFeed filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the EPA seeking all records of death threats against Pruitt. The EPA's response, there are zero records of death threats against Pruitt. CNN is reporting President Trump is preparing for a possible interview with Special Counsel Robert Mueller in the ongoing investigation into whether Trump's campaign colluded with Russia to sway the 2016 election. Trump has not yet officially agreed to the interview with Mueller. Meanwhile, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has announced Mike Pompeo's confirmation hearing for Secretary of State is scheduled for Thursday. In Hungary, far-right-wing Prime Minister Viktor Orban has won a third consecutive term after leading a xenophobic anti-immigrant campaign. During Sunday's elections, Orban's party won 2/3 of the seats in parliament, giving him even more power to reshape Hungary's constitution. This is Prime Minister Orban speaking Sunday.
There's a big battle behind us. We have won a crucial victory, got a chance, gave ourselves a chance to defend Hungary.
In Paris, protesters gathered Sunday to denounce the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the ongoing Saudi-led war in Yemen. The Crown Prince and French President Emmanuel Macron met for dinner at the Paris Louvre Museum on Sunday night, even as Macron is facing increasing pressure to reduce France's military support for Saudi Arabia and the ongoing war. This is Sadiq Al-Sar, the head of the group Salam for Yemen, which organized the protest.
Halt the bombardment, halt the embargo, which have caused a lot of deaths, notably 10,000 people, a third of which are civilians. More than 63,000 children have died due to the embargo, separate from those deaths by direct bombardment and combat. We are taking advantage of the visit of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to say, stop the massacre, stop the embargo upon the Yemenis.
The United Nations is continuing to warn of a worsening humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, saying 4.5 million people have been displaced and 2 million children are facing severe malnutrition amidst a surge in violence as President Joseph Kabila tries to hold on to power more than a year after the end of his term. This is Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, appealing for more international aid.
I want to make a strong appeal to the international community. Africa is far away from the rich countries. Many of these refugees will not trek for thousands of miles and cross the sea and arrive in Europe to remind the world of their existence, as the Syrians did, as others did. They stay here, they suffer here, but they are equally in need.
The United Nations is slated to hold a major donor conference next week to raise funds for the Democratic Republic of Congo. President Kabila's administration is boycotting the event and denying his country is facing a humanitarian crisis. In Canada, Kinder Morgan has suspended most of its work on the $5.8 billion Trans Mountain pipeline following massive Indigenous-led protests against the project. If built, the pipeline would triple the amount of oil flowing from Alberta's tar sands to the coast of British Columbia. Kinder Morgan now says if legal challenges are not resolved by May 31st, it'll abandon plans to build the proposed pipeline. In Indonesia, the port of Balikpapan has declared a state of emergency after a massive oil spill spread along the coast of the island of Borneo, killing 5 people, contaminating an area larger than the city of Paris. The Indonesian oil and gas company, Pertamina, has admitted the oil spill began after one of its underseas pipes burst. Meanwhile, in the United States and South Dakota, an oil spill from the Keystone Pipeline last November has turned out to be twice as big as initially reported. New data shows more than 400,000 gallons of crude oil spilled onto farmland, twice the amount reported by Keystone Pipeline owner TransCanada last year. The popular motivational speaker Tony Robbins has been forced to issue an apology about his comments on the Me Too movement after a video went viral of a sexual abuse survivor confronting him at his speech last month after Robbins claimed women use the Me Too movement to gain significance by playing the victim. This is a clip of the video in which Nanine McCool confronts Tony Robbins.
I'm not knocking the Me Too movement. I'm knocking victimhood. Raise your hand if you follow it. And I'm not suggesting you have to agree with me. I'm just suggesting you consider what its impact is. Look at these people and see what is empowerment. Anger is not empowerment. What you're seeing is people making themselves significant by making somebody else wrong and getting certainty. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just won't make you happy.
You are a leader and an influential man.
Yes.
And you are doing a disservice, in my opinion, to the Me Too movement. You are doing a disservice.
I can't do a disservice because everyone in this room that believes whatever she believes will continue to do it.
It's not just about what women believe. It's about what people believe. Just because you want to talk to me as a man to a woman, I'm not talking to you as a woman to a man. I'm talking to you person to person.
I understand. What are you telling me different than what I said? I told you some people misuse it, and you're telling me you don't. I'm not saying you did.
But you characterize the entire movement.
I didn't talk about movement. This is something they will use it.
Because that's what I heard.
After widespread outrage, Robbins issued a statement reading in part, "My comments failed to reflect the respect I have for everything Tarana Burke and the Me Too movement has achieved. I apologize for suggesting anything other than my profound admiration for the Me Too movement." Meanwhile, in India, actress Sri Reddy staged a high-profile Me Too protest Saturday, marching to the offices of the Telugu Film Chamber of Commerce in Hyderabad, where she took off her shirt to denounce sexual harassment in the Indian film industry. She's one of several Indian actresses who've come forward in recent weeks to say they've been touched without their consent, sexually harassed, and forced to demean themselves to get work in the industry. Comedian Bill Cosby is heading to court today in Pennsylvania, where he's facing a retrial on criminal sexual assault charges that he drugged and sexually assaulted Andrea Constant, the former director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple University, at Cosby's home in 2004. Constant is one of about 60 women who have accused Cosby of sexual assault dating back decades. Last summer, a jury deadlocked over whether to convict the comedian on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault in Constant's case. And in New York City, 1 person died after a fire tore through parts of Trump Tower Saturday. 6 firefighters were also injured battling the blaze. New details reveal there was no sprinkler system in the apartment of 67-year-old resident Todd Brasner, who died from the fire. The New York Daily News has reported as a real estate developer, Donald Trump helped lead the effort against legislation that would have required sprinklers in all residential buildings in New York City. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We've asked Pompeo before about his quotes on enhanced interrogation, torture, waterboarding, and he's basically stuck by the fact that he doesn't believe it's torture. And that, to me, is very troubling and one of the reasons I opposed him at the CIA.
Confirmation hearings begin today for CIA Director Mike Pompeo, tapped by President Trump to become the next Secretary of State, as Republican Senator Rand Paul vows to vote against him. Will Democrats unite to block his nomination? We'll look at Pompeo's record, from his ties to the Koch brothers and Islamophobic organizations to his opposition to the Iran nuclear deal. Then House Speaker Paul Ryan announces he will not seek re-election.
Today, I'm announcing that this year will be my last one as a member of the House. To be clear, I am not resigning. I intend to full my served term as I was elected to do. But I will be retiring in January, leaving this majority in good hands with what I believe is a very bright future.
Over 40 House Republicans have announced they'll resign or retire. We'll look at the state of the Republican Party with political theorist Corey Robin, author of The Reactionary Mind, Conservatism from Edmund Burke to Donald Trump. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. One day after tweeting, "Get ready, Russia, because missiles will be coming, nice and new and smart," President Trump has appeared to back off slightly from his aggressive stance over Syria. This morning, Trump tweeted, "Never said when an attack on Syria would take place, could be very soon or not so soon at all." Trump's tweet came after he missed a self-imposed deadline of 48 hours to announce major decisions on Syria in the wake of an alleged chemical attack in Douma on Saturday. On Wednesday, Pentagon Chief James Mattis said the U.S. was still investigating who was responsible.
We're still assessing the intelligence ourselves and our allies. We're still working on this.
Is the U.S. military ready right now to conduct a retaliatory strike if ordered?
We stand ready to provide military options if they're appropriate, as the president determined.
Mattis's comments came as Russia raised the specter of a direct military confrontation with the United States and Syria. Speaking at the United Nations Security Council, Russia's UN ambassador, Vasily Nebenza, directly addressed his U.S. counterpart, Nikki Haley.
You are very good at threatening, and the threats you are proffering, that you are stating, vis-a-vis Syria, should make us seriously worried, all of us, because we could find ourselves on the threshold of some very sad and serious events. I would once again ask you, once again beseech you, to refrain from the plans that you're currently developing for Syria.
On Thursday, French President Emmanuel Macron said he has proof that the Assad regime was behind the chemical weapons attack in Douma. The World Health Organization said it has seen credible reports that 500 people have been treated for signs and symptoms consistent with exposure to toxic chemicals, but the World Health Organization said it could not determine who was responsible, since Syria's government continues to block access to the area. Meanwhile, Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders has warned the White House against any attack on Syria without a declaration of war from Congress. On Wednesday, Sanders tweeted, "President Trump has no legal authority for broadening the war in Syria. It is Congress, not the president, who determines whether our country goes to war, and Congress must not abdicate that responsibility," Sanders tweeted. House Speaker Paul Ryan said Wednesday he will not seek re-election this fall, sending shockwaves through the Republican Party ahead of the 2018 midterm elections. Ryan said he's retiring to spend more time with his family, but many have cited Ryan's frequent clashes with President Trump. More than 40 House Republicans have announced they will resign or retire this year, including 9 committee chairs. During a Wednesday morning news conference, Ryan downplayed Republicans' concerns that his departure could add to a blue wave of Democratic gains in November.
I gave it some consideration, but I really do not believe whether I stay or go in 2019 is going to affect a person's individual race for Congress. I really don't think a person's race for Congress is going to hinge on whether Paul Ryan's Speaker or not.
Top contenders to replace Ryan as House Speaker are Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California and the House Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana. We'll have more on Paul Ryan's retirement from Congress later in the broadcast. FBI agents who raided the home, hotel room, and offices of President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, were seeking clues about how Cohen worked with the Trump campaign in 2016 to suppress negative information. That's according to the New York Times, which reports the agents were seeking documents related to the 2005 Access Hollywood tape, in which Trump is recorded openly boasting about sexually assaulting women. The latest revelations come as Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, urged the president to fire Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and to stop cooperating with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into alleged ties between Trump's campaign and Russia. In Algeria, the government's declared 3 days of national mourning after a military passenger jet crashed outside the capital Algiers on Wednesday, killing 257 people on board. It was Algeria's worst-ever air disaster and the deadliest plane crash since 2014, when Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over Ukraine. Among the dead in Wednesday's crash were 26 members of the Polisario Front, a Western Saharan independence movement seeking to end Morocco's 42-year rule of the West African territory. On Capitol Hill, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg faced off with lawmakers for a second straight day Wednesday, admitting to a House committee that he, too, had data from his Facebook account collected by a third party without his consent. Zuckerberg's testimony came as lawmakers investigate how the voter profiling company Cambridge Analytica harvested data from more than 87 million Facebook users without their permission in efforts to sway voters to support President Donald Trump. This is Zuckerberg being questioned by Illinois Democratic Congress member Bobby Rush.
Mr. Zuckerberg, what is the difference between Facebook's methodology and the methodology of the American political pariah, J. Edgar Hoover?
Congressman, this is an important question because I think people often ask what the difference is between surveillance and what we do, and I think that the difference is extremely clear, which is that on Facebook, you have control over your information. The content that you share, you put there. You can take it down at any time. The information that we collect, you can choose to have us not collect. You could delete any of it, and of course, you can leave Facebook if you want.
President Trump's nominee to become a federal district court judge in Louisiana refused to say Wednesday whether she supports the landmark 1954 Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court ruling on school segregation. This is Louisiana lawyer Wendy Vitter under questioning by Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Do you believe that Brown versus Board of Education was correctly decided?
Senator, I don't mean to be coy, but I think I get into a difficult area when I start commenting on Supreme Court decisions, which are correctly decided and which I may disagree with.
At Wednesday's confirmation hearing, Vitter also insisted that if confirmed, she could put aside her long-standing anti-abortion advocacy. Vitter has spoken frequently at anti-choice rallies and has worked for years to defund Planned Parenthood. She once told the New Orleans Clarion Herald that Planned Parenthood, quote, kills over 150,000 females a year. In Missouri, Republican Governor Eric Greitens is refusing to resign after a report commissioned by the state's Republican-led legislature found he sexually assaulted and physically abused a woman before blackmailing her to cover up his crime. The report cited a woman whose name was withheld who says Greitens repeatedly groped her, slapped her across the face, coerced her into sex, and verbally abused her. Speaking just before the report's release Wednesday, Governor Greitens insisted its findings were tabloid trash and gossip.
We fully expect that the report being released tonight will include lies and falsehoods. I want to say again what I've said from the beginning. This is a political witch hunt.
Governor Greitens, a former Navy SEAL, faces a felony charge of invasion of privacy at a trial scheduled for next month. Missouri's Republican House Speaker Todd Richardson called Wednesday for Governor Greitens to resign, and the state's top Democrat said lawmakers should begin impeachment proceedings if he doesn't step down. In climate news, new research finds the Atlantic Ocean's Gulf Stream current has weakened dramatically in recent years and could be headed for a collapse that would bring extreme winters to Western Europe while accelerating sea level rise in the eastern United States. The findings come in a pair of new reports published in the journal Nature. Researchers found prevailing ocean currents have weakened by about 15% since the mid-20th century, as human-caused climate change causes added vast amounts of fresh water to the North Atlantic due to melting ice from Greenland. In Chicago, dozens of employees of the Chicago Tribune said Wednesday they're organizing a labor union, which would be the first in the 170-year history of the traditionally anti-union paper. Members of the organizing committee of the Chicago Tribune Guild say they're looking for job security, raises, lower health care costs, and greater diversity in the Tribune's newsroom. And former Republican House Speaker John Boehner has joined the board of directors of Acreage Holdings, a medical marijuana company. On Wednesday, Boehner tweeted, quote, "I'm joining the board of Acreage Holdings because my thinking on cannabis has evolved. I'm convinced descheduling the drug is needed so we can do research, help our veterans, and reverse the opioid epidemic ravaging our communities," he said. During his 24 years in Congress, Ohio Congressmember John Boehner championed laws that saw millions of people arrested on marijuana charges, a highly disproportionate number of them people of color. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Nosso programa fica por aqui. Você pode acompanhar a gente pela página do Facebook e pelo blog do GECI Terra em Transe. Nos vemos na próxima semana. Até lá!